This is a formal notice of easement enforcement for stormwater runoff management, pursuant to the Whispering Creek Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, Article 9, Section 4. Her voice was a grating symphony of entitlement, a sound I had hoped to leave behind in my previous life. She stood just on her side of the ancient, lichen-covered stone wall that separated my land from the freshly sodded lawns of the subdivision. Her name was Brenda Shipley, and she was the president of the Homeowners Association. She wore a tight turquoise polo shirt with a vaguely fascistic logo of a single weeping willow embroidered over her ample bosom. I was pruning a row of Zinfandel vines, the same vines my grandfather had planted 80 years ago. The sun was warm on my back. The air smelled of damp earth and fermenting promise. It was the first truly peaceful spring I'd had in 30 years. I didn't turn to look at her. I simply made my cut, the shears giving a satisfying snip. "There is no easement," I said, my voice calm. "My property predates your entire development by a century. It is not, nor has it ever been, part of your association." "That's a matter of interpretation," she chirped, the sound setting my teeth on edge. "Our engineers have determined that the natural watershed flows this way. We're simply formalizing it. A drainage channel will be excavated tomorrow, beginning at the culvert on Whispering Creek Lane and terminating in your little pond down there." My little pond was a spring-fed body of water, the heart of this land, the source of irrigation for these vines. It was the reason my family had settled here in the first place. I finally turned. I let my eyes drift from her too-tight polo shirt to the clipboard she held like a scepter, to the golf cart she had parked aggressively on the pristine sidewalk behind her. "You will do no such thing," I said. It was not a request, it was a statement of fact. "Oh, I think we will," she said, her smile a predatory slash of poorly applied lipstick. "If you obstruct the work, you will be in violation and subject to significant fines. We have a right to protect our homeowners from flooding." I said nothing. I just held her gaze. In my career, I had faced down men with automatic weapons, negotiated with warlords, and planned the logistics for campaigns that reshaped entire regions. I recognized her type instantly. The petty tyrant, the desperate seeker of relevance, given a thimbleful of authority and treating it like an ocean. They were the most dangerous kind, in their own small, destructive way. She finally broke eye contact, her bluster faltering for a fraction of a second. "The crew will be here at 8 a.m. sharp," she snapped, recovering. Then she spun on her heel, climbed into her golf cart with a grunt, and zipped away. I stood there for a long time, the pruning shears heavy in my hand. The peace of the morning was shattered. A campaign had just been declared against my home. And I, Colonel John Harding, United States Army Corps of Engineers, retired, was being called back to service. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you think this is insane, hit that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, I definitely want to hear about it. Now let me tell you how this all started. The Harding farm wasn't some gentleman's hobby. It was 15 acres of rolling hills, a remnant of a much larger tract that my great-grandfather had purchased after the First World War. He'd seen enough of mud and ruin in France, and wanted a piece of land that was solid, real, and his. The vineyard was my grandfather's contribution, a stubborn man's belief that good wine could be made from this rocky soil. The spring was the soul of it all, a constant, cool presence that bubbled up from the earth and fed a pond ringed with ancient oaks. I had spent my career building things and managing water, Dams, levees, irrigation systems in places you've only seen on the news. This small piece of land, with its own perfect, self-contained hydrology, was the poem I came home to. Then came the estates at Whispering Creek. For 2 years, I'd endured the noise of construction as they clear-cut the adjacent 100 acres of timberland. They scraped it flat, laid down a network of identical curving streets, and erected 200 beige boxes of varying sizes. They were houses, I suppose, but they lacked any sense of place, of belonging to the land they occupied. They were impositions. The development was a monument to conformity, a place where the height of your grass and the color of your mailbox were matters of intense legislative focus. I had made it clear from the beginning, through my lawyer, that my property was not to be included. The original plat maps were ironclad. My farm was an island, a sovereign nation bordered by a sea of beige vinyl siding. For the first year after the houses were filled, it was quiet. I'd see my new neighbors walking their dogs along the stone wall, and we'd exchange polite, distant waves. I wanted nothing from them but to be left alone. Brenda Shipley, however, was an expansionist. I had seen her from a distance, holding court in her golf cart, pointing at some perceived infraction, a garbage can left out an hour too long, a child's bicycle on a lawn. She moved with the self-important waddle of a person who had discovered her life's calling in the enforcement of trivial rules. I had hoped her jurisdiction would remain contained within her own borders. I had been wrong. This wasn't about water. It was about conquest. It was about the untidy, unapproved existence of my farm offending her aesthetic sensibilities. My vineyard, with its gnarled, 80-year-old vines, was a violation of her pristine, manufactured world. The next morning, I was up at 5. I didn't bother with the vines. Instead, I made a pot of strong black coffee and sat down at my grandfather's old roll-top desk. The first phase of any campaign is intelligence gathering. You do not engage the enemy until you know the terrain, their disposition, and their order of battle. My enemy had a name, Brenda Shipley, and an organization, the Estates at Whispering Creek HOA. At 8 a.m., just as she'd promised, a small backhoe on a flatbed trailer rumbled down the street. A crew of 3 men in dusty jeans and neon yellow shirts disembarked. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee. They unloaded the machine and approached the stone wall. I walked out to meet them, not with anger, but with a calm sense of purpose. The foreman, a man with a weathered face and a cautious look in his eyes, wiped his hands on a rag. "Morning. We're here to dig a drainage trench." "I know," I said. "But you won't be doing it on my property." He looked confused. "Lady from the HOA. She said it was all cleared. Got the work order right here." I smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "She is mistaken. This is private property. It is not part of her association, and there is no easement. If that machine crosses this wall, you and your company will be liable for trespassing and damages. Significant damages." I handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the county plat map, with my parcel clearly outlined in red. I had highlighted the property lines and the absence of any recorded easement. He studied it for a moment, his brow furrowed. He wasn't a lawyer, but he could read a map. He looked from the paper to the stone wall, then back to the paper. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I could hear the tinny, screeching sound of Brenda's voice on the other end. The foreman held the phone away from his ear, wincing. Ma'am, the property owner is here. He says..." "Yes, I see the map. No, ma'am, I can't just... It's a legal document, ma'am. I can't risk my crew or my equipment." There was more screeching, then silence. He sighed and put the phone back in his pocket. "She's not happy," he said, stating the obvious. "That is not my concern," I replied. "It's your concern whether you want to be embroiled in a lawsuit. I suggest you pack up your equipment and leave." He looked at me, then at the backhoe, then at the pristine row of vines just beyond the wall. He made a command decision. "All right, boys, load it up. We're done here." As they drove away, I saw Brenda's golf cart parked at the far end of the street, a turquoise blot of impotent rage. This was not a victory. It was merely the opening skirmish. I had repelled the initial probe, but I knew the main assault was coming. It would not come with a backhoe. It would come on paper. 2 days later, it arrived. The mail carrier's truck left a telltale flag up on my rural mailbox. Inside, among the seed catalogs and a letter from an old army buddy, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, self-important. The return address bore the weeping willow logo of the estates at Whispering Creek. I carried it inside and slid it open with a letter opener my father had used. The paper inside was of a heavy bond, the kind of stationery meant to convey unshakable authority. The letterhead was professionally printed, the language a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation. It was a formal notice of violation. It cited not only the obstruction of necessary stormwater management, but a host of other newly invented infractions. My stone wall was an unapproved fence structure. My compost pile, tucked away behind the barn, was an unsightly nuisance. The barn itself, which had stood since 1920, was in violation of aesthetic codes for its weathered exterior finish. It was a comprehensive declaration of war on the very character of my land. And then there was the fine. $500 for each violation, compounding daily. A bill for a war I hadn't started. A hot flash of anger surged through me, the kind I hadn't felt in years. It was the rage of a man whose home has been invaded. But just as quickly, it subsided, replaced by something colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. It was the slow, dangerous calm that settles over you when the mission is defined and the objective is clear. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled down a heavy 3-ring binder. It was new, black, with a clear plastic sleeve on the cover. I took a sheet of paper and a thick marker. At the top, I wrote in neat, block letters, Operation Grapevine Guardian. I slipped the paper into the cover. The violation notice became the first document, slid carefully into a plastic page protector, and clipped into place. This was my new field manual, my opposition research file. Every piece of correspondence, every photograph, every note would go in here. Brenda Shipley fought with flimsy rules and bluster. I would fight with evidence, procedure, and overwhelming, meticulously organized force. The first phase of Operation Grapevine Guardian was reconnaissance of the enemy's doctrine. I went online to the county clerk's website and downloaded a copy of the complete covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the estates at Whispering Creek. It was a 90-page document of dense legalese, a tyrant's charter. I spent the next 2 nights reading it, highlighter in hand, as if it were a captured enemy operations plan. I wasn't looking for loopholes for myself. I knew I wasn't bound by their rules. I was looking for the weapons they used against their own people. I was looking for the inconsistencies, the overreaches, the procedural weaknesses I could exploit. And they were plentiful. The document was poorly written, full of contradictory clauses and vague language that gave the board immense discretionary power. It was designed not for clarity, but for control. The second phase was to establish contact with a higher authority. Brenda's power was derived entirely from her HOA, but the HOA itself was subject to state and federal law. Her claim about watershed and runoff was the key. She had chosen the terrain, and it was terrain I knew better than anyone. The next morning, I called the state's Department of Environmental Protection. I navigated the automated phone tree, a modern-day labyrinth, until I finally reached a human being. The man on the other end sounded bored, a classic mid-level bureaucrat counting the minutes until his pension kicked in. DEP, Water Management Division, this is Clark. I calmly and precisely explained the situation. I gave him my parcel number. I described the spring, the pond, and the historical nature of the property. Then I described the HOA's plan to dig an open trench from a storm drain and dump their collected street runoff, complete with lawn chemicals, automotive fluids, and whatever else washed off their asphalt, directly into my closed, spring-fed ecosystem. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The boredom in Clark's voice evaporated. It was replaced by something sharp, focused, professional. "Let me get this straight, Mr. Harding," he said slowly. "A homeowners association is attempting to create a new, unpermitted discharge of stormwater from a residential development directly into a natural spring-fed pond on a property that is not part of their development?" "That is correct," I said. I could hear him typing furiously. "Sir, what you're describing is a flagrant violation of the Clean Water Act, not to mention half a dozen state statutes on riparian rights and unpermitted discharge. This isn't an HOA matter. This is a major environmental violation." The feeling that washed over me was one of grim satisfaction. I had found my air support. "I'm opening a case file right now," Clark said, his voice now full of energy. "Case number EUM24771. I'm assigning an inspector to this immediately. We will be issuing a formal advisory letter to the HOA's registered agent within 48 hours. Under no circumstances are they to proceed with any excavation. Can you confirm the name of the HOA president for me?" "Brenda Shipley," I said, spelling it out for him. "Got it. Mr. Harding, thank you for calling this in. We take this sort of thing very seriously." I hung up the phone. A slow smile spread across my face. I opened the binder and on a fresh sheet of paper, wrote down the case number and Clark's name. Brenda had brought a rule book to a gunfight. I had just called in an airstrike. The third phase of intelligence gathering is always the most critical: human intelligence. I needed to know what it was like for the people living under Brenda's regime. I needed to build a resistance. I started my campaign the next afternoon. I took a walk, not on my property, but through the winding, identical streets of the estates at Whispering Creek. It was a Saturday, and families were out. I saw the small acts of defiance Brenda was constantly trying to crush. A basketball hoop, slightly askew, a garden gnome peeking out from behind a perfectly manicured shrub, a flag for a college football team fluttering from a porch. My first target was an elderly woman I had seen struggling with her garbage can. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She was tending to a small, immaculate rose garden in her front yard. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Good afternoon," I said. "Your roses are beautiful." She looked up, her eyes wary. In this neighborhood, a stranger was a potential source of a violation notice. "Thank you," she said, her voice thin. "My name is John Harding. I live on the old farm property just over the wall." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a flicker of fear. "Oh, you're the one." "The one?" "The one Brenda is so worked up about. She sent out an email blast, about a non-compliant adjacent property. So she was trying to poison the well, a classic maneuver. I see. Well, I'm here because I have a feeling Mrs. Shipley's style of management might not be to everyone's liking. Mrs. Gable's face clouded over. She glanced around, as if Brenda herself might pop out from behind a bush. She fined me, she whispered, her voice trembling with indignation. $50 for my bird feeder. She said it was attracting nuisance animals. Squirrels, I asked. Cardinals, she said, her eyes welling up. It was just cardinals. I listened patiently as she told me her story. It was a tale of petty harassment, of constant nitpicking letters about the height of her bird bath, the color of her welcome mat, the placement of her garden hose. She was a widow on a fixed income, and the constant threat of fines terrified her. She has no right, I said softly when she was done. There are laws that protect homeowners from this kind of harassment, but she relies on people being too afraid to fight back. I gave her my phone number. I'm putting together some information, I said. Document everything, every letter, every conversation. Keep a log. There may come a time when your story will be very important. She looked at me, a glimmer of hope in her tired eyes. She was my first recruit. My next stop was a young family, the Martinezes. They had 2 small children who were trying to ride scooters on the driveway. The father, a man about my son's age, was watching them with a weary expression. I introduced myself, and he knew who I was immediately. "You're the guy with the vineyard," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm Dave Martinez. Nice to finally meet you. Sorry about all this." "It's not your fault," I said. "I'm just trying to understand how things work around here." He snorted. "Things work however Brenda Shipley wants them to work. We got a $200 fine last month because our son's basketball hoop was, and I quote, not in a state of active use for a 48-hour period. We were on vacation." His wife, Maria, came out onto the porch. "She's a nightmare," she said, her voice a low, angry hum. "We moved here for the schools, for a safe place for the kids. Instead, we live in a police state run by a woman with a clipboard and too much time on her hands. We've thought about moving, but with the market the way it is." I heard the same story of powerlessness, of being slowly bled by 1,000 petty cuts. They had tried to appeal the fine at a board meeting, but it had been a disaster. Brenda had shouted them down, flanked by her 2 sycophantic board members, a meek-looking man named Arthur and a severe-looking woman who just nodded at everything Brenda said. "She controls the board. She controls the meetings. There's no due process," Dave said, shaking his head. "What if there was another way?" I asked. I explained what I had learned from reading the covenants, the procedural requirements for meetings, for levying fines, for notifying homeowners. I told them about the higher authorities, the state laws that governed HOAs. Like with Mrs. Gable, I didn't ask them to do anything yet. I was planting the seeds of an insurgency. I was showing them that the tyrant's power was not absolute. I told them to document everything, to talk to their neighbors, to gather their own intelligence. I left the Martinez family with a firm handshake and a shared sense of purpose. I had my second cell in the resistance. A pattern was emerging. Brenda's reign was built on a foundation of fear and isolation. She picked her targets one by one, making them feel like they were the only ones, that the problem was with them, not with her. My strategy would be to break that isolation, to forge a united front. By the time I returned home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the vineyard. I opened Operation Grapevine Guardian and added 2 new pages. One for Mrs. Gable and her Cardinals. One for the Martinezes and their basketball hoop. This was no longer just about my land. It was a liberation campaign. While the DEP's administrative machinery ground into motion, I knew I needed professional reinforcements on the ground. A good commander knows the limits of his own expertise. I was a strategist, a planner, an engineer. I was not a lawyer. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. I didn't look for a local real estate attorney. I needed a specialist, a warrior. I made a few calls to my network, old friends from the service. The name that came back was Tom Pierce. He was a retired Marine Corps JAG officer who had gone into private practice specializing in one thing: fighting homeowner associations. His firm was an hour's drive away in the city, the perfect distance. Close enough for engagement, far enough for professional detachment. His office was sparse, functional, and immaculately organized. No frills, just books, a desk, and a firm handshake. Tom was a wiry man in his late 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. He had the quiet, coiled intensity of a man who had spent his life in high-stakes arguments. "Colonel," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Good to meet you. Frank sends his regards." "Good to see you too, Tom," I replied. We spent a few minutes exchanging the obligatory pleasantries of the veteran network, establishing common ground. Then we got down to business. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you've got an HOA problem." "I have an HOA problem," I confirmed. I didn't launch into an emotional tirade. I simply placed the black binder, Operation Grapevine Guardian, on his desk. It was now 2 inches thick. He pulled it over and opened it. He was silent for a long time, turning the pages. He saw the initial violation notice, the photographs I had taken of the backhoe crew, the copy of the county plat map, the notes from my conversations with Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes, the 90 pages of the HOA covenants, annotated and cross-referenced with my notes, the page with the DEP case number and Clark's contact information. He looked up at me, and for the first time, a slow grin spread across his face. "Colonel," he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice, "this isn't a file. This is a kill box. You've done 90% of my job for me." "I believe in thorough preparation," I said. "Thorough doesn't begin to describe it," he chuckled. "This Brenda Shipley. She has no idea what's about to hit her. She thinks she's fighting a disorganized militia. She's about to find out she's walked into a combined arms assault." He spent the next hour walking me through the legal strategy. It was a multi-front campaign, just as I had envisioned. First, the legal counter-salvo. He would draft a cease and desist letter that would make the one I'd given the backhoe operator look like a polite suggestion. It would be addressed to Brenda personally, as well as to the HOA board. It would cite the specific state and federal statutes she was violating. It would reference the active DEP investigation and the potential for civil and even criminal penalties. Crucially, it would put her and the board on notice that their directors' and officers' insurance policy would likely not cover damages resulting from willful, illegal acts. This was the shot across the bow, designed to pierce the shield of HOA immunity and introduce the terrifying concept of personal liability. Second, the community front. "Your work with the neighbors is key," he explained. "We need to show a pattern of harassment and selective enforcement. It's not just about you. It's about a systemic abuse of power. We let them simmer for now. We'll mobilize them at the right moment." Third, the waiting game. "The most important thing we do now," Tom said, leaning forward, "is let her make the next mistake. Don't engage. Don't talk to her. Refer everything to me. Bullies like this can't stand being ignored and challenged by a higher authority. They double down. They escalate. And when she does, she'll walk right into the trap we've set for her. I left his office feeling 10 feet tall. It was the feeling of having a superior strategic plan, of knowing you have the right assets in place. I had my intel, my ground forces, and now my air support. The binder was no longer just my private project. It was now official evidence in the hands of legal counsel. The campaign had entered a new, more aggressive phase. The letter from Tom's office went out by certified mail the next day. A week of silence followed. It was an unnerving quiet, the kind that precedes an artillery barrage. I used the time to consolidate my position. I met with Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes again, this time together. I explained that I had retained counsel and that a larger strategy was in motion. Seeing that they were not alone, that a retired colonel and a Marine lawyer were now in the fight, galvanized them. They started talking to other neighbors, quietly at first, sharing stories, comparing notes on fines and harassment. The seeds of rebellion were beginning to sprout. Then, Brenda made her move. It wasn't a retreat. It was, just as Tom had predicted, a reckless escalation. A new notice appeared, not in my mailbox, but taped to my front gate. It was not a letter. It was a summons. I was being called to appear before the Whispering Creek Architectural Review Committee for a disciplinary hearing regarding my numerous and ongoing violations. It was a show trial, designed to humiliate me in a public forum of her own choosing. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the community clubhouse. I scanned the document, photographed it, and emailed it to Tom. His reply came within minutes. "Perfect," it read. "She's moving her troops into open ground. Let's prepare the battlefield." But Brenda wasn't content with just a show trial. Her hubris had reached a critical point. The day before the scheduled hearing, she made her fatal blunder. I was in the barn, cleaning and oiling some old tools, when I heard the sound again. The low rumble of a heavy diesel engine. I walked out and looked down the long gravel drive that led to my house. It was another backhoe, this one larger than the first. It was accompanied by a pickup truck with the logo of a different landscaping company on the side. They stopped where the gravel met the public road, a good 100 yards from my house. This time, Brenda was with them. She got out of her golf cart and began pointing animatedly toward the stone wall and the vineyard. She was directing them to start their work from the road, to bypass my driveway and come at the property from a different angle. I felt that cold calm settle over me again. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and put it in my shirt pocket, making sure the camera was recording. I also grabbed the binder. I walked slowly down the drive. The foreman of this new crew looked nervous. Brenda, however, was radiating an aura of triumphant rage. "Harding!" she shouted as I approached. "You are to return to your residence. This is an official HOA action. If you interfere, I will have you arrested for trespassing." The irony of her shouting about trespassing while attempting to order an invasion of my property was not lost on me. I ignored her completely. I walked directly to the foreman, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Good morning," I said calmly. "I am the owner of this property. I need to see your work order." He hesitated, looking at Brenda. She screeched, "You don't have to show him anything. You work for the HOA." "You work for a landscaping company," I said, my voice level and firm, still looking at the foreman. "And I am informing you, as the legal property owner, that you do not have permission to enter this land. There is no easement. Your actions would constitute criminal trespass and destruction of property." My lawyer, Tom Pierce, will hold your company personally and financially liable for any damages. That includes every single one of these 80-year-old vines. I opened the binder to the plat map and the copy of Tom's cease and desist letter, which specifically named Brenda and the HOA. I held it out for him to see. His eyes went wide as he scanned the legal letterhead and the references to state statutes. He was a landscaper, not a pawn in Brenda's private war. He looked at the ancient, gnarled vines, then at the heavy machinery behind him. He could practically see his boss's profits evaporating in a cloud of legal fees. I don't know anything about this, he stammered, taking a step back. Now you do, I said. I handed him one of Tom's business cards. I suggest you call your boss and then call my lawyer before you move that machine another inch. Brenda went ballistic. I am your client. You will do as I say. I will have your contract terminated. I am the president. Her voice cracked on the last word. The foreman had made his decision. He pulled out his phone. I gotta call the office, he said, already backing away toward his truck. Brenda's face was a mask of purple fury. She stomped over to me, her finger jabbing at the air a few inches from my chest. You think you're so clever, you old fool. This isn't over. You will be ruined. I will put a lien on your property. I will foreclose. You will see. I said nothing. I just stood there, a silent, immovable object, as my phone's camera faithfully recorded her entire tirade. The threats, the fury, the admission that this was a personal vendetta. It was a gift. The final, critical piece of evidence I needed. She had just handed me the ammunition to end the war. The landscaping crew packed up and left even faster than the first one had. Brenda was left standing in a cloud of dust and humiliation. She shot me one last look of pure hatred before climbing into her golf cart and speeding away. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Arthur, the meek-looking treasurer from the HOA board. His voice was a nervous whisper. Mr. Harding, I saw what happened today. I was on the board when she pushed this through. I voted against it, I swear. I knew it was wrong. Arthur, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She's out of control, he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. She's using the HOA funds for her personal vendettas. She hired her own cousin's landscaping company, the one you saw today. She paid a retainer to a lawyer to fight you using the association's money from the beautification fund. It's all in the financials, but she controls the records. Nobody else gets to see the detailed statements. Here it was, the inside source, the disgruntled officer ready to leak the keys to the kingdom. I can't be a part of it anymore, Arthur whispered. It's not right. Can we meet? I have copies of everything. The invoices, the bank statements. I can get them to you. We arranged to meet in a neutral location, a coffee shop in the next town over. Arthur was a bundle of nerves, constantly looking over his shoulder. He slid a plain manila envelope across the table. Inside was a USB drive. It's all there, he said. I have to go. He was gone before I could even thank him properly. I went home and inserted the drive into my computer. It was the smoking gun. A detailed record of financial mismanagement and self-dealing. Payments to a law firm for litigation services that were clearly just for her fight against me. Inflated invoices from her cousin's landscaping company. Money being moved from reserve funds to cover her pet projects and legal fees. She wasn't just a bully. She was a crook. I uploaded the files, printed out the most damning evidence, and added it all to Operation Grapevine Guardian. The binder was now nearly bursting. Tom's legal case was strong. The DEP's investigation was a hammer waiting to fall. But this was the kill shot. This was the evidence that would not just defeat her, but utterly destroy her credibility with the very people she claimed to represent. The disciplinary hearing was still on, her last desperate attempt to assert her authority. It would not be a hearing, it would be her court-martial, and I would be the chief prosecutor. The community clubhouse was a sterile, beige room that smelled faintly of air freshener and desperation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly pallor on the proceedings. At the front of the room, behind a folding table, sat Brenda Shipley, flanked by her 2 board members. The severe-looking woman, whose name I learned was Doris, sat to her right, her expression a permanent scowl. To her left sat Arthur, the treasurer, who looked pale and refused to make eye contact with me. The room was packed. Word of the confrontation with the second backhoe crew had spread like wildfire. The seeds of rebellion I had planted had taken root. Mrs. Gable was there, sitting in the front row, a look of quiet determination on her face. The Martinezes were there, with a dozen other families I didn't know, all of them holding copies of their own violation notices. They weren't a disorganized crowd. They were my troops, assembled and ready. Tom Pierce sat beside me in the back, his briefcase on his lap, looking as calm as if he were waiting for a bus. Brenda banged a small, toy-like gavel on the table. "This special hearing of the Architectural Review Committee is now in session," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the tense room. "The first and only item on the agenda is the property at 1412 Old Farm Road, owner John Harding, for numerous and ongoing violations of the covenants." She began to read from a prepared statement, listing the fabricated charges against me: the unapproved wall, the nuisance compost pile, the weathered barn. Her voice was dripping with sanctimonious authority. She was playing her part, completely unaware that the theater was about to be turned on its head. When she finished, she looked at me with a smug, triumphant expression. "Mr. Harding, do you have anything to say in your defense before this committee votes on levying the full extent of the prescribed fines and placing a lien against your property?" This was my cue. I stood up slowly and walked to the front of the room, carrying my binder. "I do," I said, my voice calm and clear, filling the room. "But my statement is not a defense. It is a prosecution." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face tightened. "This is not a trial, Mr. Harding. You are here to answer to this committee." "No, Mrs. Shipley," I said, turning to face the assembled homeowners. "I am here to speak to my neighbors, the actual members of this association, the people whose money you have been wasting, the people whose lives you have been making miserable." I opened the binder on a small lectern that had been set up. "Let's first address the issue of jurisdiction. Mrs. Shipley has repeatedly claimed authority over my property. Here is the official county plat map, dating back to 1922, showing my property is and has always been legally separate. Her claims are not just wrong, they are a fraudulent assertion of authority." I continued, my voice methodical, laying out the facts one by one. "Mrs. Shipley has attempted to use this HOA to illegally dump stormwater onto my land, an act which would have destroyed a natural, spring-fed pond. This action is currently the subject of an active investigation by the State Department of Environmental Protection, case number EWM 24771. This action, had it been carried out, would have exposed this entire association to millions of dollars in fines and remediation costs." The murmuring in the room grew louder. People were shifting in their seats, looking at Brenda, whose face was growing pale. "She has lied to contractors, attempting to induce them into committing criminal trespass, exposing the association to further liability. I held up my phone, and when confronted, she has resorted to personal threats and intimidation, all of which I have on video. I didn't play the video. I didn't need to. The threat was enough. But this isn't just about me, I said, my voice rising slightly. This is about a pattern of abuse. It's about Mrs. Gable, a widow on a fixed income, being fined $50 for a bird feeder that brought her joy. Mrs. Gable stood up. It was Cardinals, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She bullied me. It's about the Martinez family, I continued. Fined $200 for a child's basketball hoop while they were on vacation. Dave Martinez stood up. She runs this place like her own private kingdom. None of us have a voice. One by one, a dozen other homeowners stood up, each with their own story of a petty fine, a threatening letter, a dismissive and arrogant board. The room was transforming from a silent audience into an angry chorus. The foundation of fear Brenda had built was crumbling. Brenda banged her gavel furiously. "This is out of order! This is a private hearing." "This is a community meeting," Tom Pierce said, standing up from his seat in the back. His voice was quiet, but carried the authority of a courtroom. "And according to your own bylaws, any member may bring new business before the board if a quorum is present. A quorum is present, and my client has one final piece of new business." All eyes went back to me. This was the moment for the kill shot. "This is about your money," I said, my voice dropping, forcing them to lean in. "This is about how the funds you pay in good faith are being used. Mrs. Shipley has told you that her actions against me were to protect the community, but the financial records tell a different story." I placed a stack of documents on the lectern. The documents from Arthur's USB drive. These are the association's detailed bank statements and invoices for the last 6 months. They show that Mrs. Shipley has, without full board approval, paid over $5,000 of your money to a law firm, not to protect the HOA, but to pursue her personal vendetta against me. They show she hired her own cousin's landscaping company at an inflated rate. They show that she has been using the beautification fund as her own personal war chest. I looked directly at Arthur. He was ashen, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He would not deny it. The room erupted. The murmurs became shouts of "No!" and "Thief!" and "Resign!" Brenda's face was a grotesque mask of shock and rage. "Lies! These are forged documents! This is a conspiracy!" Tom Pierce stepped forward again. "My name is Tom Pierce. I am legal counsel for Mr. Harding. I can assure you these documents are authentic, and I can also assure you that a motion for a full, independent forensic audit of this association's finances is in order. But first, there is a more pressing matter." He looked around the room, at the angry, energized faces of the homeowners. "According to Article 3, Section 2 of your bylaws, any board member may be removed, with or without cause, by a majority vote of the members present at any regular or special meeting. I believe this qualifies as a special meeting." He locked eyes with Brenda. "A motion is on the floor for a vote of no confidence and the immediate removal of Brenda Shipley as president and as a member of the board of directors." Dave Martinez's voice boomed from the crowd. "I second that motion." "All in favor?" Tom called out. The response was a deafening, cathartic roar. "Aye!" It was a single, unified voice of a community that had found its courage. "All opposed?" Silence. Absolute damning silence. Even Doris, the sycophant, sat frozen, her hand not moving. Brenda stared out at the sea of hostile faces, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The power had vanished. The authority had evaporated. She was no longer a president. She was just a woman in a beige room who had been utterly and publicly defeated. She shoved her chair back, grabbed her useless gavel, and fled the room, pushing through the back door without a word. The petty tyrant had been deposed. In the immediate aftermath, the room was electric with a sense of liberation. Tom Pierce, ever the professional, guided the proceedings. Dave Martinez was nominated as interim president. Mrs. Gable, to her own astonishment, was nominated to the Architectural Review Committee with a mandate to review and rescind every fine Brenda had levied in the past year. Arthur, looking relieved, was retained as treasurer and tasked with cooperating fully with the forensic audit that was unanimously approved. The new board's first official act was to pass a motion on the spot to issue a formal, written apology to me and to declare all actions taken against my property null and void. Their second act was to draft a letter to the DEP, pledging full cooperation with their investigation and thanking them for their intervention. I didn't stay long. My part in the campaign was over. I had fought the war, and now it was time for the citizens to build the peace. As I left, people I had never met stopped me to shake my hand, to thank me. I was no longer the outsider, the non-compliant adjacent property. I was the man who had helped them take their community back. The weeks that followed saw a profound change come over the estates at Whispering Creek. The oppressive atmosphere of fear lifted. Basketball hoops appeared on driveways. People put out welcome mats in colors other than beige. A sense of neighborliness, long suppressed, began to bloom. The consequences for Brenda were swift and severe. The audit revealed the full extent of her embezzlement. The HOA, under its new leadership, filed a civil suit against her to recover the misused funds. The district attorney, alerted by the findings, opened a criminal investigation. Her cousin's landscaping company was blacklisted, and her lawyer sent her a very large bill, which the HOA refused to pay. Faced with legal fees, a lawsuit, and public disgrace, she was forced to put her house on the market. 6 months after her public downfall, a for sale sign stood on her perfectly manicured and now ironically non-compliant lawn. One warm Saturday in late summer, Dave Martinez knocked on my door. He invited me to a neighborhood barbecue being held in the small park next to the clubhouse. "It's a celebration," he said, "a declaration of independence." I accepted. I walked over the stone wall and into the community I had fought, and in doing so, had inadvertently saved. The air was filled with the smell of grilled hot dogs and the sound of children's laughter. Mrs. Gable showed me pictures of the blue jays at her newly reinstalled bird feeder. Maria Martinez thanked me, saying their kids felt like they could finally play in their own yard. I didn't stay for the whole party. It was their victory to celebrate. I was, and would always be, a man who preferred the quiet company of his vines. I returned to my porch as the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the vineyard. The grapes were heavy on the vines, ripening for the harvest. The spring-fed pond was clear and still, reflecting the deep blue of the evening sky. All was quiet. All was at peace. On my desk, the black binder, Operation Grapevine Guardian, still sat. I picked it up. It was heavy with the collected documents of a short but intense war. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most effective weapon is a well-organized file. I didn't need it anymore. I walked it to the fireplace, but I couldn't bring myself to burn it. Instead, I took it to the barn and placed it on a high shelf, a retired soldier's campaign records. My grandfather had fought for this land. My father had preserved it, and I, in my own way, had defended its borders and secured its sovereignty. The Cincinnatus, called from his plow to save the Republic, could now return to his fields. The peace was profound, hard-won, and sweeter than any wine these grapes would ever produce. The war was over. I was home,